Go ahead, Brian. You were going to say something.
Well, I was going to say, I think Barry's larger point about what America and is about in terms of blending together, coexisting people of different types and backgrounds, is a bigger question than cultural appropriation. Because if the goal of America is that we all become more and more alike, it matters little if you take on the aspects of some other culture. That's what we're all about. But if the goal of America is somewhat different, that we coexist with one another while remaining our individuality, then if you try to take on someone else's perspective, in some ways that could be offensive if you portray yourself as something you're not.
Well, yeah, if you're phony, but there, just by the way, there are plenty of people in this country that don't think that living together as one is a good idea.
I understand. I don't know the answer, but I do think that's a critical and broader question than just cultural appropriation in the context of music or in the context of theater or in the context of the arts.
Right, right.
You know, when I think about this, Brian, I think back to the way the immigration from the early 1900s, the way those groups got assimilated or didn't get assimilated. My grandparents, for example, and maybe many of our other grandparents. I mean, my grandparents came over from Russia. They spoke mainly Yiddish in the household. They were Orthodox Jews. My parents were born here. They spoke mainly English, but knew a little bit of Yiddish, and they were conservative Jews, and then became Reformed Jews, and so on. So, I mean, how did this all happen? And ultimately, my family became assimilated, where we don't walk around with wearing yarmulkes and taluses, and we're Americans. But how is that working now for some of these Native American groups that Alan was talking about? And how is that working with Latino groups and other groups who've come more recently? And how is that reflected in the schools? Because the schools inevitably, as Neil pointed out in his piece, are inculcating a style of behavior and rules and ways of acting that reflect the majority culture. And so the people who come from a different culture and don't exhibit those attributes are fail or struggle in the majority culture. So how do we orchestrate all that? Are we really? I mean, because clearly, I think it would be preferable to become more of a mosaic than a melting pot. A melting pot implies that you've given up your native culture to become part of a majority culture. The mosaic says you retain some aspect of that and bring it to the majority culture and enrich it in doing so. So I think that's kind of a lot of what we're kind of discussing, which comes out of Alan's talk and Neil's paper.
I think it's always been a very ugly process, and there's always been hatred and violence since the very beginning of America against out cultures that weren't the mainstream cultures. I'm not in favor of that ugliness and violence, but on the other hand, this is my own pet theory. There are two primary visceral instincts that human beings have with regard to society. One is to join and help and be part of a group, and the other is to kill the out group. I don't think we'll ever get rid of either one of them.
I think the American pattern of assimilation that my grandparents and parents lived through, a lot like what Barry just described, is changing. And so I don't think there's a static answer for what we want or what we should try to promote. It varies as the world evolves. I think that's one of the things that makes it hard. If we were just going to say, let's adopt a national curriculum and teach it to everyone, that would be a solution, but probably not right for our times.
Yeah, I agree, Tony. I agree with your point that it is an ugly and messy process, and every one of these immigrant groups, including my forefathers and many others, met with a lot of bias and anger and violence in their attempt to assimilate. But it did sort of happen over time, and I think a lot of this depends on the tactics you use to encourage it. And this is where I think that the let's take the issue of representation, which Alan brought up. We want to have different cultures represented in our media. Seems like a good idea, but how do you bring it about? And that's where it gets to be very tricky. For example, the movie business, they actually adopted rules to get representation into movies. How many minority people appeared in major roles? How many appeared in supporting roles? How many people appeared behind the camera? And these became a set of rules, a quota system that was adopted by the movie industry in order to bring about representation of underrepresented groups. And to me, it's a very off-putting strategy, and yet it's probably necessary because in the absence of it, the status quo will just perpetuate itself. So I think we have to sort of, and that same rule comes into play when you look at affirmative action and DEI programs. You're trying to level a playing field we all, let's say, agree has not been level over time. The minute you do that, you're disadvantaging some of the groups that have benefited from that unlevel playing field. So how do you do that? I think the right wing has been very adept at using DEI and the regulations that came with it as a stalking horse for their positions. So my view on DEI, I'll just throw it out there, is that it would have been better if it had not been institutionalized. In other words, if people just used those values in the decisions they've made for institutions, for granting admissions, for hiring, just made it just a value that they considered. But the minute you make a DEI department in a company or an institution, and somebody in charge of orchestrating or enforcing DEI, you make it a big target for the right, and that's exactly what happened. So, we're
Yeah,
living through that.
I think that's absolutely right. And the problem with this, it's our original sin, for one thing. We have a magnified issue with immigration because of slavery and the legacy. And um, to put a positive note on this, things are not as bad as they were in the birth of our country. It's now not very considered cool to be a racist. It's not acceptable socially to be a racist. And the DEI, I think I agree with you. I think it was however, the problem is that at a certain point you have to get rid of affirmative action, and we're on our way to doing that. And because if you don't, what you're doing is asserting that women and minorities are inferior and they always will need help, and that we don't want to have that be our position. So you're going to go through this unpleasant transition between having everybody treated equally, which is the exact goal of the whole thing, and giving some people a helping hand. And that's
That's
the ugly place we're at right now.
that's the John Roberts argument. But the problem with that argument,
What is his argument?
his argument is, if you want to eliminate racial bias, don't use racial bias
I know,
for
but
any.
you can't do it all at one fell swoop. You're going to have a period of transition, which
Well,
is what we're
okay, but the
in.
problem is if you agree that there are structural aspects of racism and bias that are sort of baked into the system to ameliorate them, you have to tip the balance in an opposite direction, and which immediately causes the majority white population to get their hackles up. So that's the problem with it, but because by doing nothing, by letting it happen naturally it tends to perpetuate itself. It doesn't happen without some conscious pushback in the other direction. And the
Right.
question is, in
Which
my mind, is how do you make that pushback in ways that are politically acceptable and don't engender a counter reaction, which is what we're living through now.
I think it's important to say that not all uh, Anglo-Saxon white people think we've reached the same level of equality of opportunity in this country, and so the statement really needs to be more complicated. Some are pushing back and thinking that DEI has gone too far, and there are others who feel that the sins of our founding and the previous 200 years of have not been addressed fully, and they're willing to make some sacrifice and to allow us to continue promoting women and minorities more than others. And drawing the line is what's difficult. Saying when is enough is what's really.
And how do you do it? Yeah, I agree with you, Brian. But I think what we're living through now in the MAGA world is a distinct pushback in the wrong direction. What Tony talked about is the arc of history bending toward justice. It's being bent in the opposite direction, and we're undoing a lot of the gains that were made in civil rights and other areas of personal. And also, they're attacking the free press and so on and so forth. So they have been able to weaponize these values in a very dangerous way, and they have a lot of support in doing that.
Part of it, I think, is that any outcome that somehow does not lead to white males, if you will, winding up in a favored position is viewed as DEI. So especially rich white males. So our medical school has a system of admissions that is an effort to avoid an effort to get a highly qualified group of students, but without loading it with people whose parents were doctors and rich kids, and but to try to basically give points to things that suggest that people have the potential to be really great doctors. So for example, they get points for coming for doing really well in school despite coming from uh, being the first one to go to college or whatever. So there's this whole point system that they've worked out. It does not include race in any or gender in any form other than through perhaps mediating factors. And we actually have, I think, the most diverse medical classes in the country. So we're now being sued because somehow the fact that we have a system that creates a group of medical students who basically look like the state of California must be producing unqualified people because we're not getting an overload of rich white males and,
Right.
and and maybe some Asians. And so the thing that they point to is, oh well, the average for the non-white males is 5 or 10 points lower on the MCATs. Okay, so I've taught in medical schools now for God knows how many years, what, 40, 50 years, and I have never seen any evidence that a 10-point difference on an MCAT makes you a better student or doctor. But they're basically looking for any little teeny piece of evidence. And when more women started getting into college than men,
Yep.
there's this freak out. We've got to do something to advantage males again. Never mind that all the years that females were disadvantaged, not admitted to Harvard or Yale or Princeton or whatever, all those years, nobody complained about the fact that males had an excessive privilege. And now, somehow females are like 50 or it's like 60% of entering classes in some schools. Oh my God, the world is coming to an end.
Right. Well, I mean, if you look at the way in which the right has demonized DEI programs across the board, and now is basically eradicating them, and most of the institutions that had DEI departments and DEI protocols are bending the knee to this right-wing push. That's exactly what you're saying. I mean, that the dominant group that enjoys the benefits of those structural biases is going to push back, and they're pushing back very hard right now and very effectively.
Let me read. Leslie is supposedly monitoring this, but she gave me a. Did you guys get this? A question to ask Alan, but Alan's not here either. But I think we can all discuss it. Um, has to do with education. In the schools with lower income base, this is a quote from her. In the schools with a lower income base, how much do the programs and staff provided by Title I help offset the disadvantages in home and neighborhood environment? Unfortunately, Alan's not here to respond, but maybe some of you other ones who are involved in education or have been have an answer.
Well, if you use test scores as the metric, then they do not, then whatever programs exist in the typical school, typical Title I school to address the disadvantages of low income students do not make them perform at the same level as higher income white students. Whether they have ameliorated some of the gap, I'm sure that's true, but I don't know how to measure the percentage since we don't have a good counterfactual.
I'll just say, Lori Santillo here, Shepherd. I'll just say that my experience and what I know of the research is like what Laurel is saying, which is the average difference between whites and blacks is a standard deviation as of 20 years ago. And no one is saying that you should just give away that standard deviation difference, which is huge. The way I think about it is the way Laurel said, 10 points doesn't matter. And so if you use test scores and straight top-down selection, we have to have only the people at the very top. You're going to end up with whites predominantly and Asians on your test score selection criteria. But the correlation between those test scores and all the different indices, mostly freshman GPA and graduation rates, is only 0.45 at the highest. And in many not elite institutions, it's much weaker than that. So when you say, I'm going to do it on test scores because that is merit, then you're exaggerating the information in the test. So you can give away 10 points. You can give away 20 points. You don't have to give away 100 points to increase the diversity of the entering class. And you aren't inviting visible differences in performance. If you do it kind of within the error and the unfairness of the test to people who haven't had the same background, but who are motivated, who will work hard in college, etc. So the trick is how much to give away to what Barry was talking about, which are the structural inequities, and how much to hold the standard so that you don't, the way Leslie's saying it, is disadvantage the entering group. You don't want to let people in who will fail, because then you're reinforcing the stereotypes and the negative consequences of being where you don't feel like you can succeed.
Right.
I turned my sound back on just for a second. I guess my question wasn't just how do people do on the test scores, because I taught both in Title I schools and non-Title I schools, but the enrichment, I mean, it was wonderful, some of the stuff we got to do with Title I funds that the kids in the regular schools didn't get. But in terms of enrichment, does it prepare students to be able to handle college? I mean, I'm just, this isn't a thing with a clear answer, but I guess my question is, are we able to use the funds directing them toward the kinds of things that would help kids embrace wanting to be educated along the more, what would you say, the standards of what colleges are looking for so that they can succeed if they get in?
Well, there's you know, okay. So if you had to say, well, I'm going to pick, we don't need an admissions committee if what we're going to say is we're just going to use test scores and you're going to start at the top and go down. But it doesn't work that way any more than you say, well, by the way, I need a cellist for the student orchestra, and I need athletes, I need the theater people, I need, you know, I do a lot of things, and people come at a lot of different ways. And it's important to have test scores because it shows you, at least to some degree, the degree of preparedness for getting success in college. And that's the challenge actually UC systems really fighting about, is that they found out if you don't ask that, you maybe people aren't prepared. But setting that aside, success in college is um, it's not an intelligence test. It's a willingness test. It's can you figure out how to do it? Can you stick with it? There's a lot goes into it's not determined by your test score that got you there. It's by your willingness to make it all the way through. And what is it you have to do to keep at it? That's why I brought up the idea of grit and confidence and you know growth mindset and all those sorts of things, because those really the it's okay, 25% of students who start in college at the end of the freshman year don't go back the second year anywhere.
Yeah, and
I
the
mean,
institutions have a role to play in all of this and
yeah,
some responsibility. You can say, here's our program, come do as well as you can. If you graduate, we'll give you a certificate. If not, goodbye. Or you can try to look at places where students are encountering difficulty and build in props, support groups, tutoring, whatever it might be, and take a greater responsibility to see that your freshmen make it through as far as they want to go.
right, right.
The other side of that too is recruitment, and this I encountered this in the corporate world too, where at Disney, they were interested, they felt like they needed to diversify their workforce. And they looked at who are they recruiting? What high schools are they going to? What art programs are they talking to invite students from those backgrounds to come into this corporate environment? Uh, and they found that historically they had been going to not a very diverse group of high schools and art schools to get their talent, and so they diversified their recruitment. And guess what? They got a more diverse cadre of people. So I mean, I think a lot of this depends on the strategies you use. I think Brian's right. That you don't have to just you can be a meritocracy without being blind to these disadvantages and giving some people opportunities to overcome some of them, because it's true that and this is the whole thing about test scores. I would ask Brian and Lori, because I know you're in that field. It seems like we went through a thing where all of a sudden colleges stopped looking at SAT scores, and now they're going back and looking at them again. I'd be interested in your thoughts about that. um, why did that happen, and is that a good or bad thing that they're going back to them?
It happened hugely during COVID. So, I mean, that's when you saw this big wave. There's been quite a number of colleges for decades who were like Bowdoin College, prided themselves on not requiring test scores, but a large number of institutions did it in response to COVID. and then, as you say, are going back. Um, the answer for me, and like holding out in graduate programs, yes, I want to see their GRE scores, especially if they want to emphasize quantitative methods, for heaven's sakes, but not to say that we only accept the 800 people. And to learn, in fact, um, what puts you in the game, what score uh,
Yeah.
may mean you can participate, and then that's when the grit and the perspective taking and all these other strengths and talents add to your chance of success. We want you to succeed,
Yeah,
and
I want
we're gonna do what Brian was talking about as well to support you.
I want to echo Lori. The meaning of the score, very low scores are a very ominous sign that you really lack the basics and fundamentals of
Yeah.
either English language skills or math. But after a certain point, whether you have a 700 or an 800 board score in math is is not going to decide whether you're really successful. I mean, maybe the people who are straight 800s and top out on every test will come in ready to start at more advanced math classes. But but that's not the same as whether you'll succeed in college as a whole. And I think, as Laurie said, there's some level of proficiency that gets you in the game and ready to do college work. And part of that is having the background from high school and some courses that you actually worked in, which is where grades have something to say. Um, and part of it is when you get there, being willing to work and having the support infrastructure that helps you know what college is about. A lot of um, first generation college students are scared to talk to the professor, come and ask for help. And there's a whole set of skills that to walk into college to know kind of how to be a college student. There's a wonderful essay somewhere by Nikki Giovanni, and I might have had a copy of it around here somewhere, that she wrote to kind of, especially for this group of people who are coming to college without the background of families having sort of shown you this is how you do college. And it goes through all these little things that some of us probably took for granted getting to college. I was lucky my mom was going to college, for San Jose City College and then San Jose State, while I was sort of 8 to 13 years old. And I would occasionally get to go to classes with her. But I saw what it took for her to be a good student. I got to go occasionally meet her teachers. I saw her do her homework and take notes, and all of the things that kind of go with being a student. I learned with my mom, and my dad, of course, was teaching, and so he knew all this. But if there's a certain amount of hand holding or guidance that we need to do with these kids who come in with the ability, and maybe they've done okay in high school, but college is a different story.
Yeah, there's another aspect to this when we talk about, which is the curriculum itself when they get there. Okay, so let's take a liberal arts college. Um, Black studies programs, for example, or Latino studies programs, which were very much the vogue when we were there. They were just coming into being when we were in college. And now the right is trying to e- eliminate them because that's DEI, that's preferential thing. Whereas to me, that's a perfect example of trying to have the curriculum is not a finite thing, particularly in a liberal arts college. It's not like a medical school or a science program. It can change over time. Can we acknowledge the contribution of Black writers or Black historians and so on and so forth, and other cultures, and make that part of the curriculum so that people coming from different backgrounds have something they can identify with? That seems like a good idea to me. But now, of course, the right wing is trying to eliminate them.
Oh, it's medical schools change too. We now include classes on how to treat the health of transgender patients. Okay, the right wing is hysterical about this. How can you possibly talk about transgenders people in medical school? Because they're going to show up in your doctor's offices and your emergency rooms. And what do you know? what does that have? What impact does that have on their health history and their health problems? And, but they want to eliminate that.
I mean, the disciplines that struggle with this the most, perhaps, the discipline is mathematics. At least in California, at the University of California, it's the math department that is pushing hardest for strengthening the prerequisite requirements and raising the scores because they have a fixed body of material that they think is key to teach. And if students can't come in and take course number one, then they can't get any further in the discipline. And it's hard to convince them that there are ways to restructure it, perhaps, to make it accessible and to make mathematics meaningful for a broader swath of people. But they see their goal as practicing research mathematicians.
You know,
And
I don't know, Brian, having taught people who supposedly come into college prepared to learn and actually don't know that they think that one fourth is bigger than one third.
oh, I'm not saying high
It
school
is.
is doing
I
a
mean,
good
there are
job.
some real fundamental gaps in math education that are not, these are things we should not have to be teaching in college. And people come in.
Well, which isn't that an argument for strengthening the prerequisite requirements and
Oh,
not
yeah,
admitting those people?
absolutely.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. But I don't know. Even with that, I've had sort of a secondhand observation from our grandson who was a math major here, although he came in with a lot of the he went in fairly straight into more advanced courses. But even in the advanced courses, he said there was kind of a bimodal distribution of preparation, and that the grading was strange. The grade shift and the the amount of handholding, especially after the pandemic, that people wanted much more spoon feeding. And if they were doing programming in courses, they had to actually be told. Not everybody, but a big chunk of the class needed needed essentially models that were very, very, very tightly structured for every single thing, and had to have something essentially to copy. And so again, I think that's the worksheet culture. And I put that back on the elementary schools, as far back as the elementary schools and into the high schools, that everything has to be a testable little worksheet problem, and doing
That
hard things is
that
not.
brings us to now I understand Leslie's question about so what does the Title I curriculum look like? And I guess I was surprised, Leslie, to hear that that you experienced it as enrichment that wasn't that wasn't helpful to prepare kids to be in college. And I think that's unusual. My experience in way too
No,
many.
no, I experienced it as enrichment that was great. It was wonderful, and it might not have been measurable on a standardized test, but I think
Okay.
it was very valuable.
Okay, because I think that so many Title I schools have a test-driven curriculum where they're doing what Laurel is talking about, and that the ones maybe more like what you're describing, I think can enhance test performance if what you're doing is giving meaning to why would you want to do this instead of rote. Um, why wouldn't you want to study neighborhood justice and write about it and give public presentations about it and go in front of the school board and learn academic skills in the context of here's why these very often statistics classes in high school are more meaningful if they're given a policy purpose instead of just doing algebra and not being able to see why you're doing this thing. Um, for sure, fractions and percentages, etc., need to be grounded in why would you want to know this, and those are uh, they are rarer, but that's the kind of Title I curriculum that can be preparative, and help kids that are coming from a background where they haven't had the chance to see why you would want to learn this, in addition to getting the academic preparation that they absolutely have to have.
And
You know,
while we're sort of talking about high school, I would like to ask what people think of this notion of college for all, because this whole conversation has kind of been premised on the idea that everybody ought to go to college. That's the ultimate goal, and how do we get kids there, or who do we restrict, without saying much about alternative paths into jobs and meaningful careers. And I would say there is a slice that as a society we need people who can perform lots of other functions other than those requiring a college degree. And high schools can help kids thrive by focusing on areas of excitement and expertise, if it's art or music, or if it's applied technology. There are other ways to do well by our next generation.
I agree with that, Brian. And I think, first of all, I think we way underinvest in vocational training, vocational education. It was always kind of a side note. If you couldn't handle the academics, maybe you took a shop class or something like that. I think there's a lot of potential to do more with that. And I also think that this goes back to the point I was making in the last conversation about multiple intelligences, that basically the standard curriculum, at least in the elementary school, really focuses on mathematical and language skills that are really a part of the broader spectrum of what intelligence really is. And it neglects things like emotional intelligence and musical intelligence and mechanical intelligence, which are undervalued because the educational institutions don't stress them and don't reward them. So I think that's a really good point you're making.
Yeah, I'll just chime in and add to that. I will have to look up after this the name of a researcher 20 years ago who was so focused on the fact that kids taking international tests outperform us uh, dramatically in Eastern European countries. And his point was that, these are heavily screened into college for a smaller percentage and into vocational, but their vocational education is so much better than ours, that their mathematics scores on international PISA at age 15 are fabulous compared to us, because not only do we denigrate, so there's a social stigma to going into vocational paths, but we teach by rote, uh, remedial math in our vocational schools instead of apprentice programs. In these European countries, this was the main takeaway, is that those kids spend half of their school day in a vocational apprenticeship, and they're learning, and there's mentoring that connects the curriculum to why you'd want to know it as a carpenter and why you'd want to know it as a baker, etc. And those international comparison data are dramatic. So, let's learn from Czechoslovakia instead of the way we do it now.
Which doesn't
I, you know,
exist anymore, but that's okay.
I actually think that what's happening a little bit in this country, or has been, is that the companies are taking on that burden, and they're realizing that if they're just hiring kids right out of college, they're not coming with the requisite skills that allow them to be productive in the workplace. And so they institute training programs and apprentice programs to fill that gap. So they're kind of moving into that vacuum that the educational institutions are not filling.
And in fact, many of the most successful career and technical junior colleges um, are do their development in collaboration with local employers.
Yeah.
And they go out and they figure out what kinds of jobs are available, what skills will be needed, and develop programs to train kids, some who are jointly enrolled in high school and junior college, uh, to have positive workplace outcomes.
Yep. Yeah, I was involved in a program like that at Santa Monica City College because it's also happening in the arts and design fields. The companies that were doing design companies and software companies and game designers were finding that same problem that the college kids didn't have the skills. A program was founded. I forget what the name of it was at Santa Monica City College that involved industry and academia working in tandem to develop the curriculum and the program so that these kids had a natural path into the workplace from these programs. And they were very popular, very effective, and very highly in demand because the kids really wanted jobs. They wanted to be able to use what they were learning in the workplace, and these programs were giving them a leg up on getting those jobs. In fact, there's a high school in San Gabriel Valley called Roland Heights, I believe, that has a pioneering computer design program in the high school that is so good that the employers come to them. They have a yearly open house showing off the kids' work, programs they've designed and things, and the employers come to these because this is a way of finding talent, and it builds on itself. You know, it just becomes this kind of virtuous circle. That was years ago, so I'm sure it's gone way beyond that
Yeah.
now.
So there's a it's interesting. So that kind of what my argument is, but today we have a different kind of encouragement. People are suggested by God when you go to college, make sure you can do it in STEM, right? Because then you'll be able to get a job, right? Um, and I'm gonna come back to the vocational issue here in a second, but I'm inclined to argue that that's probably true. But we do know that people who are well versed in the liberal arts over time will outstrip people who start in STEM. Not that not that the scientific and technical skills diminish over time, but it's a question of resilience. And it goes back to the vocational side that I teach you that one of the values of an internship is you learn, you know, I'm learning this internship, but it also means there's some academic floor that I need. I need the math. I need the language skills because what I'm doing has more sophistication than just hammering nails. Right. That there's more to it, and my capacity to continue to keep getting jobs over time are going to have to do with my resilience and the skills I have, not just in the technical aspect of it, but the general aspects of it. Um,
I wanted to follow up on what you were saying, Neil, in terms of liberal arts education. That's one of the things I worry about with the focus, even on good technical education for people getting on vocational tracks, is that I've just noticed among people who have missed out on a liberal arts education, they have a lot less of a sense of what has gone on in the world and what is going on in the world and what the connections are in all these different areas. And so they sort of have to either pick that up in adult education classes or you need a lot better grounding in it in high school classes. And the other thing is that it's my understanding that people really tend to change careers several times during their lives now. So if you've only had your technical education for one track, you might find that it's difficult to go into other fields. I'm finding that my daughter's friends who had liberal arts educations are able to do just about anything when they change jobs?
Well, but if you look at the enrollment patterns in colleges right now, it's the enrollment is way down in the humanities and the those subjects, and way up in the STEM areas. And if you look at the investments that the colleges are making in the plant and equipment for those disciplines, they're not investing in that in the humanities. They're investing it in the science, arts, in the sciences and the technical fields, and that's where the big money is coming from the corporations to fund these vast new departments in the universities. So there is a definite trend away from the humanities and the traditional liberal arts education that we enjoyed at Pomona. It's just not going in that direction.
I wonder, this is the era of AI. A lot of that STEM stuff is just going to disappear, and a lot of kind of mid-range intellectual stuff is going to disappear too, and it already has. And it's a little hard to predict what the future holds for that, all that stuff. I tend to agree that a liberal arts education is going. I'm afraid that's kind of an elitist bias in on my part, maybe, but I agree that I think it gives you more flexibility as a human being to be able to think in all these different dimensions, and it may serve you better than a strictly math education. On the other hand, we can't really tell what's going to happen with AI and what jobs AI is, and that's going to be massive. Does anybody know anything about that?
Well, I think part of this conversation, not the AI side necessarily, is really about the notion of transfer and whether you are learning skills that you can apply in other contexts than the narrow ones in which you've learned them. And some disciplines are better at teaching transference than others. You don't often see in mathematics that, but in literature, it's quite a common sort of question. What are the relationships that we see in the Odyssey that are similar to those that we see in the Caine Mutiny? But it is a teachable kind of mental activity that is not always found in the sciences as widely as it might be in other areas.
I would say that I would just say that depends a little bit on how they're taught, because our grandson started having to write proofs in seventh grade, and that is highly transferable to literary analysis, to programming, presumably to philosophy, and back and forth, because trying to think hard about what a question is really asking and what the answer should look like is an important and transferable skill. He was, by the way, a classics minor, so with
But was he
but
actually taught to transfer, or are you just saying what he learned in his with his capacity is transferable? Because you can really
I think
teach
he was
transfer.
taught to transfer, and also the teaching was really good because they were graded on style as well as accuracy. So you write a really sloppy proof with all kinds of extraneous stuff. So I think he was taught in his writing classes to apply the same feel for. So I think the teaching, but it required a lot of individual feedback. But it's teachable. It's math is not just doing worksheet problems, and that I think I said before. But if you, as Laurie suggested, teaching practical things too, and having to apply questions of technology or whatever in a context where it really matters what you're doing. Not that, yeah, you have to learn how to do the problems with the two trains going in opposite directions, but there are a lot of important applications of that in, for example, pharmacokinetics.
I wanted to mention this last weekend I had my daughter visiting, and she kept a lot of her high school friends in Chico. So they all got together and went floating on the river, and they were at our house for a party. Um, it was scary how many of them are terrified because so many of them have lost their jobs in their 50s, and they all went to good colleges, Stanford and all these places, and they had jobs that were connected to great big companies, and they should have been succeeding, but maybe because of AI, um, jobs were getting consolidated and consolidated and consolidated so that their jobs were, as they used to say, or they still do in England, they're redundant, and they lost their jobs and they're 50 and they can't find new jobs. So, and I mean, they are finding new jobs, but they're like, oh, suddenly I'm going to be uh, an optician, or I'm going to do parties for companies or something like that. It's not at all what they wanted to do or what they were trained for.
Yeah, I think the changes in the workplace are going to be monumental because of AI. And I think we're just seeing the beginning of that now. But I think it's going to be huge. And how it affects education and educational institutions, I can't predict. But I think the nature of work itself is changing. Um, and it's an interesting and scary time. And it's tough on educational institutions because they have to figure out how much do we adapt to what's going on outside around us, or how much do we stick to our guns and say that what we've traditionally taught is valuable and important, and we're going to continue to do it, even if it doesn't translate into jobs.
Well, the now, by the way, there's not a lot of current evidence that AI has really changed employment at this stage. Um, but if you think of every piece of technology that's occurred over time, um, there's been a lot of, I'll call it the operational kind of busy, sort of the busy part of it. That one of the things we're learning, certainly in law, is no different than it was way back, and that is the premium is not on doing the work part. It's on the analytical. It's like, does this make sense? Is this what we should be doing? Is this the right way to do it? Does that what the case really said? Because our artificial intelligence in general kind of works in the fuzzy middle. It doesn't work on the edges, and it's every new go round of technology forces us to be, I don't know if smarter, but at least more, and our skills, our intellectual skills really have to come through, right? We can't spend our time, I use the used to be people had to do clear checks by hand, right? And then all of a sudden they are all done by a machine, and all the people who collected by hand. But now I got to get smarter. So what am I going to do now? Well, I have to do something more that's not manual. I have to be more sophisticated, and so on. So I think those skills are going to continue to be significant. Certainly in my field, it in law certainly it is. In otherwise, can you make sense out of all this? Is that you know, there's only so much AI can do to treat patients, right? That
I don't
it's
know.
you know.
I'm not that sanguine about it. I first of all bear in mind that AI is brand new. We're in early days of what AI can do, and it will get more sophisticated for sure.
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, an AI can look up every law case that's ever been uh, decided on a
I
particular topic
I got to
in
do this, take this, but they could also read.
he drifted off in 10 seconds.
They
Uh,
might.
AI can look at every case that's ever been decided on the topic that you're uh, interested in. And so I don't know that I trust the fact that I don't think they're going to replace Doug Reevely and his chimney sweeping. I don't think AI is going to do that, and I think there's a lot of similar jobs. But I'm not so sure about intellectual jobs. A lot of intellectual jobs are just studying a huge amount of material and recognizing patterns, and AI is great at that.
Yep.
On that cheery note, I have to go to another appointment, but I
Oh,
will be
okay.
replaced next time by my AI avatar.
That's we'll look forward to that, Brian. We want to see what you come up with. Okay, great, man. Good to see you.
No, I agree with Tony's point that I think it varies industry by industry and area by area. I do think that on a positive note, if you look at all the things that AI is not going to be able to do very well, which are high touch things, it's not going to be doing massage work or physical therapy and things like that. Um, and it's not probably going to be doing childcare and early childhood education. So those areas which are underinvested, in my opinion, in our society are may become bigger and more prevalent as AI. But I think in the areas of knowledge workers, there's going to be a huge impact, and it's already showing up in many areas. In fact, computer coders are coder jobs are being replaced by AI programs that were designed by these people that are now doing the work that they used to do.
I think the coolest thing, it isn't taking anybody's jobs, but it's the coolest thing that AI is being employed to do is figure out animal language, which we are kind of have a mental block against because we have our own idea of what language is and what communication is, and it's like science fiction. How the animals are communicating is not like how we communicate, and AI is it's not human, so it's great at they'll show it videos of whale behavior and concurrent sounds, and AI is better than us at figuring out what they're talking about. I think that's a very cool thing that's being done. So it isn't all horrible.
I read an article in the New Yorker about humanoid robots and how they're coming along. That's also an area where they're struggling a lot because the simple tasks that humans do, physical tasks, are very hard to automate and to do it in a dependable way. In fact, most of these companies in which they're getting huge investments from the people that invest in these things, and but their biggest problem is that the robots they're building keep falling down and injuring people and self-destructing. It's very hard to replicate the physical tasks that human beings, even at a very fundamental, very basic level, can do. So
If you
it's
just
going to be a while.
if you just imagine there's a bunch of tasks. Like there's so many nerve cells in your hand. Suppose you want to reach into a drawer that you can't see the back of and find a pencil in there. You don't have any trouble with that. You can scramble through there and your hand can figure it out. We don't have anything even remotely close to being able to do that with robots. They can't do anything like that. Grab
Right.
something out of a bag that you can't see. They can't do
Yeah.
that.
In fact, that reminds me of a statement I heard at a TED conference but somebody said, working in artificial intelligence gives me great respect for the mental capabilities of an imbecile.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, where'd Otis go? He just disappeared. I wanted to talk to Otis about next time. He's up, by the way. And Lori, what can you tell us? Can you give us a show?
Oh, I'll have to think about it.
Well, please do. We just got a bunch of really talented, highly educated people here, and we can all learn from our friends. And I just think, what else we got to do, you know?
Well, I've
Otis
been
is there,
catching up.
Tony.
I'm watching Leslie, and I watched Alan when I couldn't attend, and so I'm catching up.
Okay. Otis is there on the screen, Tony.
I'm
Oh, there
here.
he
Yeah,
is.
I
So,
am there.
Otis, so you're ready to go for next time? You think you're going to do it in one time or two?
Oh,
Just get
it'll be one time,
one
and
time?
I think it's kind of relevant to this conversation because it's how a creative writing major um, from Pomona, MFA graduate in filmmaking from UCLA, ended up as a an advertising copywriter. And it's kind of, I'll talk about that career path, talk about the things we did, and also talk about a course I taught for a while and extension programs on how to use the principles we use to sell things to succeed with other kinds of communication.
Uh, Fabulous. I did, by the way, find your blurb, so I do have that, and I'll send that out
And then out, yeah.
before next time.
All right.
And then you gonna say something, Neil?
No, no, I'm sorry. I that was actually a client I had to talk to. I'm sorry.
Oh, you.
I actually do work. I'm
Oh
sorry.
no. I don't admit that in public. Um, okay. Anybody have anything else today? This is great. I love this stuff. It always brightens my week to know that not everybody in public is stupid. It's a nice respite from the steady diet of idiocy. So, anybody have anything else? Otherwise, we'll go on with Otis next time, and I'll send out a blurb on that.
Sounds good.
Sounds like a plan.
All right, guys. Good to
Thanks,
see you as
everybody.
always.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.